Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat about Lorcan Owens as he's about to step onto a plane back to Australia to pursue a different life to the one he has in Ireland. Lorcan is from a small town in Roscommon. He's a qualified primary school teacher, but as he says himself, he chose this profession initially as it was a safe choice. He chatted about living as a gay man, deciding when to come out, his huge interest in the Middle East and geopolitics, and his brief spell of working in that industry, which he would love to get back to. Like all of us, he is faced with choices in his life to pursue his happiness, and I wonder what is next for him. Let's hear from Lorcan. Lorcan Owens, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Greg. I really appreciate it. I was pleasantly surprised when you contacted me to ask me to participate. So here I am.
Well, the reason I did is very simple. You connected with me on LinkedIn, and as usual with that platform, you have a quick little peep at whoever this creature is that's connecting with you, and you see their one-line description on their bio, and immediately I thought, this boy is interesting.
Thanks for that. I'll take it.
Now, I don't want to reveal everything at the very, very beginning of our conversation, but I do want to reenact a real situation. I know at the moment you're sitting, I think, at home in Roscommon, is that right?
Yes, I'm at home at the moment in Roscommon.
Okay. But I'm going to roll the clock forward a tiny bit. And I end up sitting next to this bearded man on a flight to Australia. I'm going out because I've never been there before. And the orange juice and the peanuts have been served. And I realized very quickly the magazine that I bought at the airport isn't very interesting. And we end up having a bit of a chit-chat. I hear the accent and okay. So how are you doing and where are you from?
I'm from Ballintubber in County Roscommon. So I would say West Roscommon, quite close to the Galway border. Part of the parish is actually in County Galway. And I am at home at the moment. I came home for Christmas from Australia. In fairness, I only moved out quite recently in September. And I am originally a primary school teacher. So that's what I started off doing. I trained in Dublin in Marino Institute of Education in 2010. And even then I was thinking, I'm not really sure about this. And I was very mindful, probably too mindful for someone of my age, but that was very much, as you remember, the right smack bang in the middle of the recession. And I genuinely didn't know what I should do with my life at that point, being very aware, as I say, too aware of what was going on because I watched the news a lot and I was interested in politics and economics and blah, blah, blah. And I decided to become a primary school teacher as a safe option because I wanted to pursue international relations or applied languages in UL. I remember that was an option. And I loved languages and I decided not to on the basis that, I don't know with hindsight what I was thinking, but I said I'll go for the safe option and become a primary school teacher. And I trained there for 4 years. And then the country was still not in a great place. And I wasn't keen on staying in Dublin, living in the college house, renting, etc. And there were very few jobs, very, very few. I remember handing out my CV in fourth year. We worked during the day and we went into college in the evening. And I remember handing out my CV in Dublin 22. And I remember going into one school and they said, the principal met me and said, I have 210 CVs inside. Yours is going to be shredded. So I thought, are we allowed to curse on this? No.
Okay, curse all you want.
I'm not going to stay on here next year, I'm going to head off to the Middle East. And my intention was the stereotype of UAE, Dubai, or somewhere in the UAE. And then a recruiter I spoke to said, have you ever considered Kuwait? I was actually quite familiar with Kuwait, surprisingly, because my local town hosted Kuwait during the Special Olympics was that 2003? Yes. So I was quite familiar with Kuwait as a child. But I decided, right, I'm going off to Kuwait. Deep down, there was an element of me also running away from myself insofar as my sexuality. So I am gay, and I'm openly gay now. But at the time, I was not openly gay, and I wasn't even exploring it, let's say, even on a private capacity. So there was a lot of built-up tension, I think, me feeling that I needed to leave that environment where I'm with my friends all the time, and I was starting to wonder when are they going to join the dots, etc. So I felt like I needed to go somewhere where I'm not known, and you would think I would have picked somewhere like London or somewhere where I could actually embrace my sexuality, and instead I went to Kuwait, which was actually surprisingly, there was a gay scene there, surprisingly active. But that was me. I went to Kuwait, and that's where I really realised, notwithstanding I found Kuwait extremely boring, I have to be transparent. I loved my school, who I worked with, my colleagues became my friends. There wasn't a lot to do. There was no alcohol. There was nothing like that. We used to drink dead rum, and you'd buy bottles of ethanol and you'd mix it with 7-Up or Club Orange or whatever their equipment was. But I started to travel a lot, as you do when you're in that region. You're on a tax-free salary and you don't pay rent and you're not paying bills, really. I think the only bill I had was my phone bill. So you have a lot of disposable income for 22 or 23 years of age, and you explore. And I was particularly taken by Lebanon. And I remember when I went on my second trip to Beirut, I realized I want to, investigate this further as an academic pursuit. And I already knew at this point, and I knew from, as I say, when I went to Marino, I didn't really want to be a teacher. And I had said to myself at that point, when I get back to Ireland, because I was never going to stay there forever, I'm going to pursue some sort of academic study whereby I'll end up back here and I'll pursue research in relation to the political system here. And I did go home to Ireland. I was intent on sticking with teaching, but I actually came out then when I came back to Ireland. So that was 2016. Wow, that's 10 years ago. So June 2016, the bank holiday weekend, I came out to everyone, plaster, rip-off effect.
The secret is out.
Yeah, but I also decided there and then I want to change career. I don't want to be a teacher. I pretty much have never been a teacher. And that was nearly like coming out in and of itself, because it's very hard. And I have to say credit to Marino, but also it's not the kind of place where if your heart isn't really in it, you can't really get away with it. And I actually got progressively better as a teacher, training as a teacher there. But people are very serious about it. And it's a standalone teacher training college. So it's not like you have your friends who are studying engineering and your friends who are studying construction or your friends who are studying nursing. It's just teachers and 80% female or whatever. So I felt like this was nearly another coming out that actually I don't particularly want to be a teacher. And I decided then to pursue a master's in political communication in DCU, which was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I've one or two very close friends from it. They're friends for life. But I just felt this, this is for me. I remember when I was in Marino, I missed a lot of lectures. We used to sign each other in. Marino was former Christian Brothers Training College, and it had that element of tight control and people you had to be signed into every lecture. And then I was in DCU and I'm an adult and I'm going to everything because I want to be here and it's interesting and it just comes naturally to me. It doesn't feel like work or effort. And I was very intense. I had already made a decision that I'm going to pursue something in relation to Lebanon as part of my thesis, because I remember we had that conversation when we started. What were we going to do our dissertation or our thesis on? And I already knew. And I ended up having a very, very good supervisor called Tanya Lokot. She's Ukrainian and she's still in DCU as far as I'm aware. And she very much supported me. Like, I think if this is what you want to do, because I was kind of straying more into international relations as opposed to political communication. So the title was The Communication of Secularism Within the Confessional Political System of Lebanon. So basically, I was examining how non-religious aligned parties try to communicate their message or even create a presence within the context of Lebanon, because Lebanon is similar to Bosnia or Northern Ireland. It's a highly sectarian society, at least nominally it is. Well, it literally is, but I'm sure you're familiar with the Lebanese Civil War, 1975 to 1990. Sectarianism wasn't the only reason why that happened. There was a lot of geopolitical reasons, but sectarianism was a big component. So you have Christian groups, Maronites and Greek Orthodox, etc., Armenians, and then you have Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims, and then you have the Druze. They're an esoteric breakaway of Shia Islam. And somehow this country actually functions to some degree, or at least used to, with all of these different groups and their own history and their own identity, and they're all valid and they're all equally Lebanese. The problem with that is that people who don't fit into that, or let's say have a religious identity, but it's only a name and not lived practice, they're kind of somewhat excluded from the system, because the parliament is divided 50-50 between Christians and Muslims by decree, basically, or a verbal agreement, the TAF agreement in 1990 that ended the Civil War. So I was there, probably, thinking of my own identity as well as if I'm gay and nonconformist. How did the LGBT community, which is quite vivid there actually and quite vocal, how do they break through this system? How do the people who want a secular state break through? How do the communists and what have you communicate in a system where religious parties are basically aligned with a particular religious group or have a religious patron? So I did that in June 2018. I went over. I had only 2 interviews organised in advance, so it was qualitative research. And over the course of the week, I just kept meeting interesting people. And I said, would you mind if I interviewed you for a dissertation? And it just grew. And that was probably one of the best weeks of my life. I don't know. It always stands out as that week when I was in Lebanon, doing something I loved and meeting all these really interesting people. I met a Palestinian, so they're excluded by default because they don't have citizenship, and members of the LGBT community, women, and as I said, people who might have a particular religious identity, but they don't want it to be their identity. They want a secular Lebanese state. So that was fascinating. Then I decided to go to Canada after I'd finished my master's. And we spoke earlier about why I'm no longer in Ireland, but certainly at that time I really felt like I wanted to get out of Ireland. I didn't want to be in Dublin. It was a real draw, and it wasn't necessarily because the housing crisis, it wasn't as bad back then. I just felt like this real need to leave Ireland, and I'd always wanted to live in a city where English wasn't the mother tongue, so I moved to Montreal. Didn't really do my research on that because it's actually extremely difficult to have a professional job in Montreal or Quebec without French. But it was a fascinating experience to see, again, like from the experience of a minority, feeling like I'm in a linguistic minority for the first time in my life was a really interesting, and not like in Kuwait, because they really facilitate English speakers in Kuwait. I'm working in an English speaking school, Arab children who are learning English. This was me actually, I was working in a school in the English Montreal School Board where quite literally the minister announced over the radio in May 2019 that one of the schools in the school board I worked for was going to be transferred to the French system. So there's a kind of a continuum there of me, by some sort of fluke, finding that I'm in some sort of minority situation or in a real niche. And that happened in Montreal, just randomly. And then COVID, I left Montreal, came home to Ireland, COVID happened, and that was probably the best thing ever because I had time to kind of breathe and think. And I forgot to mention, I met a really interesting guy. I was in Abu Dhabi for a couple of weeks after Canada, and I met a guy, he has his own company, he's also from Cork. Can I name people?
Oh, of course you can.
Yeah, Sean Patwell, he's a really nice man. I have a lot of time for him. He has his own communications company called CW8. And I met him in Dubai through LinkedIn. And we went for drinks in Dubai. And I was keen to work, maybe have work with him or explore opportunities, etc. He had nothing at the time. We stayed in touch. And then August 2020, I messaged him on Instagram about something that was happening in the news. And he said, I have a bit of work if you're interested. And that's where I felt I finally got my career off the ground. And I always remember that I owe that to Sean and to Caroline. Caroline O'Sullivan, she's from West Cork as well, that they got me off the ground and they gave me really interesting work. I'm living here at home in Roscommon, working for my granny's sitting room or my bedroom, and doing really, really interesting work. It's country risk analysis, stuff like that. So he works there, a PR agency. They had a particular client at the time. They wanted someone who had a bit of geopolitical expertise, and they drafted me in, and they gave me a lot of, it was more the sense of they valued my skill set. There was no micromanaging at all. It was, that's great. Like, this is great work. We'll tidy it up. Maybe, I wouldn't be maybe the best at the PR jazzing it up element, but the work in and of itself, they always appreciated. And there was no such thing as an unpaid internship, because I forgot to mention that I did not want to go doing unpaid internships as I attempted to change my career. And I was paid from the get-go with them. So I always owe them that. I feel like I'm talking too much, so I don't need to stop and see if you...
No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. And if we're on that flight and you're all into the conversation, I'm going, God almighty. I probably better ask him a question at some point. So, Ballintubber, I've never been there. Growing up in a small town, are you in a village or are you out in the country, or what was your setup?
We're out in the countryside. We'd be about 3 miles from Ballintubber, which is a village. And my local town then would be Castlereagh, which is about 8 miles away, I think. And Roscommon town it's nearly 6 and 1. Roscommon is almost as close, if not, I don't really notice much of a difference. So I would say I live between the two towns.
Yeah. Are you farming folk, your parents, or?
Yeah, we are. My mother is a nurse and dad is a farmer. And we still have the farm here. We're not suckler farmers anymore. And we have a lot of sheep and we'd have dry stock. I wasn't particularly keen on farming, which is not uncommon with gay men, I think. But I was quite into it for a phase when I was a primary school child, and even secondary for a while. I wouldn't be mad into it now, but I think I like country life in ways that maybe a lot of openly gay men don't. Or how will I phrase it? If I was in a relationship, I think I'd be quite happy to live in the countryside, maybe preferably by the sea. And maybe that's because I think, unlike a lot of men who grow up in rural areas, I don't have any sob stories about being gay in Roscommon, the dark county, as I was told when I came out because it voted against the marriage referendum in 2015. I always explain to people the context of that time. For example, I wasn't in Roscommon that time. I was in Kuwait in complete and utter denial about my sexuality. And I remember actually when that result came out, my housemate was from Crosshaven, actually. And I heard him tell my other housemate from Liverpool about this vote in Ireland, and they were both talking very favourably of it, and they were, real straight men, lads, 40 types, and realising, God, they're not homophobic. And that was, I think that's when it might have sowed a seed of, I knew I was gay. I had accepted myself I was, but I wasn't willing to come out. And it took exactly 13 months later, I finally did. And I felt I had to go back to Ireland to do that. But I can't say that necessarily there was anything uniquely traumatising about growing up in Roscommon. I went to a mixed school. Actually, I was talking to another friend from Cork. Cork is a big team in this, about this yesterday. I think the fact that I went to a mixed secondary school was a huge help, because I would have noticed, let's say, with Roscommon town, where there's the convent and the brothers' school, that you had the more stereotypical binary between male and female. I was able to go downtown with women in Castlereagh and sling hands. Literally, I remember slinging hands with some of the girls. And then I joined the lads, and I was doing woodwork, which I was awful at, but I loved French. And I was able to have these dual identities. And I still feel I am a bit that way. And I could flow in and out between, but I wasn't. It was a natural flow. It was me being comfortable with a group of women. And
you weren't pretending too much to anyone. You were comfortable in both scenarios.
And as school got, generally with gay men, from what I found out since I came out, that secondary school gets harder as you get older because hormones, etc., and things become more obvious. But it got easier for me as I got more confident, and I was very aware and mindful that I was acting like a chameleon. I was able to, nearly like a superpower. I felt like I was able to be different versions of myself for different people. But also my friendships, etc., were genuine. But it does become maybe too easy, if that makes sense. I think maybe other people who were in my shoes would relate to that, where you get very good at acting and you get very good at engineering. And when I was in Marino, with hindsight, it is bizarre. But I remember when we'd be on nights out in Quinns in Dublin or the Big Tree or wherever we were going, and these would be very heteronormative places with your county colour nights and the St. Pat's crew and us and DCU and what have you. I would be dreading these nights. I mean, I used to dread them. So I think it became more of an issue for me in college. And I would deliberately be upstairs in my room getting ready, quote unquote, but I was actually avoiding the conversations down in the sitting room because they were, for me, danger territory, where my housemates were talking about who they intended to pull, who they intended to go off with, blah, blah, blah. And I realised that these conversations always happened while we're pre-drinking. So I avoided that. And the way I avoided it was the taxi would be outside and I'd run down the stairs, and I would have managed to win. In the context of your podcast, I'm winning by managing to evade this conversation.
Yeah, you're dodging the foreplay of the night with the boys.
It was a defensive. I was socially engineering my nightlife to avoid these conversations because in my mind, I thought everyone knew I was gay. And when I actually did come out in 2016, apparently nobody knew. And my dad did, to be fair to him. He said he figured it out about 4 years prior. And I think one of my neighbours and an uncle. But all of my close friends from roundabout here and college and friends I made on the J1, they hadn't a clue. And my friends from Kuwait, they hadn't a clue. I remember telling the crowd from Kuwait and they were gobsmacked. So
I have a nephew and he's gay. And like that now, my sister and her husband, to be quite conservative, we were invited over because they had something big to talk to us. And so that was the big news. That was the big news when we went over. Big revelation. And I know my own father, when he heard the news, he cried. It wasn't anything against Owen. It was more, he thought he was going to have a very tough life. And my mother is very worried as well. No, Owen isn't a bother. There was no hiding with him, I swear to God. And okay. I guess is he mid-20s now? I think as the years have slipped by, it seems to have got easier and easier. Now, you might slap me for using the words easy because you probably tell me nothing is easy, but it certainly it's very easy for him, and he just lived it. He was going to the Pride marches in Dublin and he wasn't hiding that from anyone, and he used to have fun with it, and in no time at all. He was introducing his boyfriend to my mother and stuff like that, you know. My mother is 90 and very religious woman and all that kind of thing. Like, I separated when I was 28 and I remember her saying to me, how could you do this to me? But very open-minded at the same time. I've had a lot of few gay men on the podcast. Quite recently, a guy, David Ellis, he was a hardcore hospitality man. And I remember him saying to me, he could be quite brutal with people he dealt with because he said he was always hiding. They were never dealing with the real him. He was always putting out on a front. So to be a bit cold with someone wasn't a bother because he was always hiding who he was. But anyway, being in Roscommon, I imagine your folks were kind of quite conservative farming folk and all that kind of thing. Would that be the case?
I think we are. You see, I do wonder, I was quite surprised even when the gay marriage result came out, because I did think most Roscommon people are horizontal, if I'm completely honest. Bear in mind, Ming is from Roscommon. And Ming I'm not sure how popular he is now. He did very well in the election. And I voted for myself, full transparency. But he went from county councillor, an avowed atheist, advocating for legalising weed, and about pro-choice, etc. And I do find that there's a lot of live and let live in Roscommon where people did not agree with his views in the early 2000s when he was a councillor, and the country as a whole was very conservative. In 2002, we had an abortion referendum, or one to, if I vaguely remember, to make it harder to have an abortion. That was rejected, but there was still no appetite to liberalise it. So we were, during the Celtic Tiger, we were a very conservative country. And when I look at that, and then, again, I have to be frank, when I came out, I was starting to get a bit annoyed with people saying, oh, you're from the dark county, and it must have been so hard growing up. As opposed to any other part of the country, I don't know. I know others, I can't speak for everyone. I know others actually. I have read some articles. One person, I think he works for the Irish Independent, he's been quite vocal that he found it very difficult in Castlereagh as a gay person. But I felt the fact that I went to a mixed secondary school and that my experience, people were quite live and let live, and you could be left wing and right wing. Most people are kind of right wing-ish. My parents, we went to mass every weekend. We went to knock a lot growing up. I came out and as I say, Dad was mixing up the milk for the calves when I told him, and he said, I've known for 4 years, and that's it. It was the most uneventful. It was just completely like, I'm not going to say he was indifferent, but it didn't bother him. My mother was great when I burst out crying when I told her. So I told her first. Well, I told my friends. I was down in Lee Carrigan Shannon the night before, and I had friends from home who happened to be down there for the bank holiday, and friends from college, and I said, this is the perfect time to come out. And they were all gobsmacked, and they were from all over the country.
Are you sorry you didn't come out a bit earlier?
No, I wasn't ready. I think I thought about that only once or twice. I kind of regret that in 2012 when I was in the J1 and I was in the gay, where it all started in 1969 in New York. I kind of regret that I wasn't out then or didn't explore it again when I had the opportunity, blah, blah, blah. But I was in denial and I wasn't ready. And maybe I would have liked if I'd come out literally a couple of months earlier in 2016. But that's all we're talking, literally maybe 2 or 3 months earlier.
Okay. You mentioned primary teaching as being a safe option. What would the non-safe option have been at that moment in time if you'd pursued exactly what you wanted? What was it in your nature to grab safety?
I would have obviously liked to pursue, at the time, applied languages. I have often wondered, what if in that regard? And obviously there's nothing stopping me from learning them now. I have reasonably middling French, maybe B2 in French, Spanish, and never really developed it. What was, as I say, I was probably overly cautious. I mean, certainly for my parents, I had already dropped out. I forgot to mention that I dropped out from Thurles the year before. I went down to Thurles of all places to study environmental, what was it? I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do after secondary school. I ended up living over a pub in Thurles with a great bunch of people for a few months. But my parents were very much do what you want to do. So it was coming from me. I did aptitude tests, etc. It did come out that you're very good at working with people, the personality traits to be a teacher. I think I'm a reasonably good teacher. But at the time, I think I was very mindful. I was seeing the place shut down around me to a large degree. But again, I shouldn't have been that aware of it. But that's just my nature. I'm aware of society and geopolitics and economics. And I saw a whole load of people who had been going around as boy racers suddenly disappeared because they were gone off to Australia and to England and Dublin. Dublin was the best option in terms of at least they were in the country. And there was no work. I mean, the country was shutting down. And genuinely, I looked at if I study French or Spanish, I can go to France or Spain. But I would have been mindful of the fact that Spain in particular was in dire straits. I would have been that aware, at 18 or 19 years of age. And what would my options be? I could be a secondary teacher, but there was no jobs for secondary teachers. So I was aware as well at the time, to be fair to me, that I can go anywhere in the world with teaching. So I can go off. I was aware that it was an escape. It was an option where if I needed to escape Ireland, I could do that. And that's exactly what happened.
It's funny, I'm an accountant for my sins, and or chefing or being a bar person. They're all like international passports, aren't they? You can get anywhere with those practical skills. a carpenter, an electrician, a brickie. They're needed everywhere. So maybe it was safe, and maybe it was a really flexible way to have an adventure that was like an anchor that you could always rely on in some way that could take you anywhere.
And also, my life experience, it's not like, so I ended up, for example, working for Credit Suisse in Switzerland as a compliance officer managing PEPs, politically exposed persons. But how would I have any concept of that at 19 years of age, that job even existed?
Yeah.
I didn't have the life experience. I had only been abroad once on a school tour in 2007 to Italy. And I just didn't, you're not aware of these jobs when you fill out a CAO form. I might be an accountant, I might be a teacher, I might be an engineer, I might be a doctor. But there's a whole range of other professions out there that we just had no concept of at the time. So I just went with it. And the big thing, actually funny, and I thought about this the other day when I was thinking about what I'd say for this podcast, but I was very mindful in fourth year that I want to cop myself on and do well in the dissertation and pick something you really love. I wasn't mad about teaching, so I studied how the teaching learning of Irish dialects in the curriculum, because I love Irish. So how does the Mayo dialect, how does the Connemara or West Kerry dialect manifest itself through the primary curriculum? And I was very aware that I wanted to do well in my dissertation so that I could go to a college later or a university with an application for a master's and be able to say I have the academic credentials. I was thinking ahead, actually, to be fair, in that regard, but I wasn't even thinking of the classroom. With hindsight, I wasn't.
The standing in front of a bunch of kids and trying to educate them and give them something. What's that like? Typically, how old are the kids that you've been teaching?
All days you ask me this to be the group I had today. They're primary, so that'll be 5 to 12. I had a very wild group today. Now I have to say they were lovely, but they were wild. In a 3-teacher school. I do think that, in fairness to teaching, it probably without question, it developed my social, personal skills. As you just said, standing up in front of a group of people, speaking. I had a podcast myself during COVID. That ability to speak my mind and to articulate something and to explain something, it is a gift. And I absolutely, what goes around comes around. But there are days where I love teaching, even though it's not necessarily what I want to be doing at the moment. But when it works well, it's lovely. It's second nature to me now. I walked into the classroom today. I didn't get word about it until 9 o'clock. The school is an hour away. I said to them, I'm not going to be down till 10 o'clock or later. I walked into the room and the other teacher was there and I said, I'll take over. My name's Mr. Owens and that's it. And that ability to do that is actually a great thing, to be fair, that it probably gives me the confidence to then rock into a bank or meet Sean Patwell in Dubai and think that I have something to offer him. And I had, and I know people complain a lot about teachers in politics, but is it any surprise when we deal with people all the time? We explain, we stand up, we educate, we plan lessons, we read social cues the whole time. You're reading body language, you're reading children's eyes, you're reading everything. So it's not a surprise that translates into politics or roles where you're dealing with people. And also, it's a very human role. So you see society there in the classroom in front of you. Children who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, children who might be refugees or homeless, etc., or whatever it might be. And that's a microcosm of society. So again, it's not surprising that teachers often end up in various spheres of public life, from my point of view anyway.
Well, what do you do to get that kid's attention who really doesn't give a shit?
A lot of it is empathy and meeting them on their level, to be fair, and not coming in all guns blazing. And as I said, reading those social cues, encouraging them, their positive behaviour as opposed to their negative. So if they're known for being a troublesome child, it's not necessarily helpful to constantly emphasise the negative aspects. And we would have been trained, in fairness to Marino, they trained us very well on this, that you encourage positive behaviour. But also you're mindful of they mightn't have the capacity to sit there for half an hour. So you need to differentiate, or they have shorter tasks, or they might have movement breaks, or they might need a specific bespoke award system to encourage positive behavior. Or you give them jobs. A lot of it is small, and it sounds giving them jobs, but a lot of them are just looking for validation, I think, a lot of the time. And they might just want something like, do you mind passing out the paint? Or do you mind being in charge of handing out the copies? And a lot of the time they're just looking for that validation from an adult that they can do it. Because again, you don't know the context of where they're coming from. They might feel like they're ignored by adults at home, or there's issues at home, and an adult trusting them to hand out the copies is such a vindication for that 7 or 8 year old child that they can do something and they get a star for it, or they get a dojo point.
Funnily enough, I hear it a lot in the podcasts from people who will say things to me like, it was that teacher who saw something in them and encouraged them in a particular way, and that is 100% responsible for the path that they're on. I've had the guys from the band Ruby Horse, and one of the particular teachers in Spridnave in Cork, the doc, they used to call him Doherty. He used to run plays and gave them access to the school hall to do their music and explore things and all that kind of stuff. In my case, I remember it was an English teacher who went above and beyond in saying to me that something that I had written was really, really good, in a way that I believed that I do actually have a talent here. You know, where something is pointed out to you and they're light bulbs that set you off. The teacher has such a special role with those children, away from parents and all that kind of thing. It's a bit like the coach in a soccer team, or coach in any team, that they can see something in the child. And again, it's away from the parent, that bit of encouragement, making them feel good about themselves. So it's a colossal role. So, and I'm sure it's a privilege to do that. And it's a privilege for the children if you could do that with empathy and everything else. The fact that you've been kind of bouncing from role to role within teaching, do you think you might feel a little bit different if, you had that fixed role and you were there with a bunch of kids from the start of a term to the end, and you can see them grow and develop and everything else?
I had a group last year when I realised it was too early to move to Australia, because the feedback I was getting was that the market was very flat. And because I'm on a working holiday visa, I didn't want to activate it too early, because then it expires within a year. So I held off and I got a job in a school. I've done a good bit of work in it in North Lampford. But we had an art inspection actually from the Department of Education. So I thought this was going to be, a nice stint. There were a nice group of kids. I knew the school inside out and we were going to have an easy life. And then we found out, we're having an art inspection. And then this was due to happen during during Owens. And then we had no electricity and we had to cancel the art inspection and we didn't know when they were coming back. So something I thought was going to be very straightforward ended up being a bit messy. And the day they actually landed, which was the postponed date after AO, and about a week later, we still didn't have Wi-Fi. And one of the inspectors, his big thing was e-learning and digitization in the classroom. And there was me hotspotting a video about Harry Clark. That's what we did for my lesson. They created their own stained glass using acetate strips and black card. But I love Harry Clark and I love his art. So I said, if I'm going to do this right, or I should show that I love what I'm doing, and I love Harry Clark and I love his art. So it did. I got really positive feedback, which was great. But I said as well at the time, to answer your question, I'm here now for about 12 weeks, so I'm as well to just pick topics that I enjoy. So we did a lot on local history, for history and geography, and English. And then I said, I love Irish. So I asked the children to collect local words and phrases that have survived in North Longford and South Leitrim. There's a lot, actually. Irish and English and even Scots. And that was our English as well, and history and geography. And we covered a load of interesting subjects. And yeah, it was nice to see them grow, especially in drama. They were very shy at the beginning when we were doing drama. And I said, my theme was 1920s, 1930s, when the silent movies transitioned into the talkies, as they call them. And we literally manifested that in the classroom. We watched Charlie Chaplin. I split them into groups and they had a particular assignment. No, I didn't even give them one. They just created it themselves. But it was all miming. And then eventually I said it's the 1930s and we're going to introduce dialogue. and it completely transformed. But I could see them they ended up begging me every week, you're only supposed to do it an hour a week, and I was probably doing a little bit more than that. And in other schools, they wouldn't go near it. They don't like drama. And this was, North Longford, a lot of them are from agricultural backgrounds and fairly, Longford people are fairly blunt and they'll tell you black and white. And these kids just loved it. And they were, fourth and fifth. And that stands out, actually, seeing how they emotionally and I deliberately mixed up the groups, to mix up the friend groups and that. And it was lovely to see, actually, that they just came to love it.
Yeah, and I just wonder, would it give you more if you had that continuity with the group than just dipping in and out, which I think for the most part has been the bulk of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, but I've had, as I say, Kuwait. I did long stints in Dublin, but once I made that decision to change career, I was in another school last year, and I did think, they were offering me a job, and I was really enjoying the school as well. And they were a lovely group of kids. And I was thinking, God, will I just settle down here and do a stint with these and maybe eventually get a permanent job and what have you. But I do love the political risk. I love the investigations work I've done, or like what I did at Credit Suisse, which was my favorite job so far. I love geopolitics. I love high risk, high stakes. I do find teaching is like, for me, it is a bit of a working holiday, at least in Ireland. I'm not going to say that about Australia, and I'm going to be transparent. I don't like the education system in Australia. But overall, I've been in some very good schools, don't get me wrong. But I do find when I come home to Ireland, like, the curriculum is so broad. We have the art, we have the music and drama. Active learning is actively encouraged by the Department of Education, and Irish, for example. And it's a holistic curriculum, and I do find, for me, when you dip into it, and the lovely schools I've worked in, even today, there's something kind of wholesome about it. But it's kind of, for me, it's like my step down while I'm trying to ultimately reach for something that's maybe ostensibly a lot more stressful and definitely doesn't seem to be offering the same level of longevity as I found out at Credit Suisse. But that's just the way my brain is wired. I love, as I said, geopolitics, risk, advising, and I loved Credit Suisse, if you want me to get into that.
The work of a political risk consultant when you were doing it, what's that like? The particular clients that you're working for and the brief you're given and the expectation from you.
When I was with CWA, so they had a specific client, for example, it was mostly looking at particular topics. It was actually just me looking at the media pretty much. And then it broadened. It broadened into risk reports and enhanced due diligence on people that their client might have wanted to involve themselves with for a public relations event. So it's just me screening who these people are and checking, is there any nefarious media that doesn't align with the interests of the client, etc., as you would do in public relations. And that's when I realized I really like investigations and deep dive, sussing people out and sussing out what's going on. And the only thing about that role was that it was freelance, and eventually the relationship with the client came to an end. But at this stage, I'd already got a job in the University of Edinburgh, and there was quite a nice theme of continuity there, except it was focused on the University of Edinburgh's relations with the Scottish government, the British government, and the City of Edinburgh Council. But 2022 got me with that year. There was so much work that year, and it was so easy to go from role to role. I got a role. I had two choices. I was in Edinburgh. The pay was terrible. I liked the job. I loved the people I was working with, but the pay was terrible. And it was more so just to solidify, right, CW8, now I'm working in an actual office and it's formalised full-time, but it's not paying enough. I got a job then I had two choices between two risk consultancy companies. I went with Pinkerton, and their client was Meta. I just didn't like Meta. I didn't like them from the outset. I didn't like this apostolic succession culture with, say, Mark being Jesus Christ at the top, Mark Zuckerberg. And this kind of, culty, it was weird. And I wasn't there that long anyway when he decided, of course, all his great plans for digital world during COVID didn't come to pass because it was 2022 and everyone wanted to go back to living normal lives. He had miscalculated the need for this metaverse, blah, blah, blah. So he started laying people off. I wasn't one of them. I was only a contingent worker. I left on my own accord. And I saw this job advertised in Switzerland for Credit Suisse. I knew nothing about Credit Suisse. I'd never even contemplated working for a bank. And I would have been very weary of the banks because of what happened here in Ireland in 2008 and 2009 with Bank of Ireland, AIB, etc., and Anglo-Irish. And yes, I saw this job and I just knew like this job is perfect for me. And I was chatting to people. I have a few pen pals, I suppose you call them that, from LinkedIn. And I spoke to a few and they said, yeah, that role is a great role for you. Plus the pay is great. And I remember I wrote I think it was a 2 or 3 page cover letter. You know, you have your cover letters and you apply for jobs and you might put not much effort into them. And now we're using ChatGPT. I mean, I wrote this out word for word. ChatGPT didn't exist at the time. And I really wanted this job. And I remember when I did the interview, the first round with Rachel from my team in Credit Suisse, I just knew straight away I wanted this job. I knew I wanted it. And I had obviously started doing my research on them, as you do when you're like me, inclined. And I knew, okay, this bank is actually in a lot of trouble, but they're developing a new plan to save the bank, the new Credit Suisse, they were calling it. Francesca McDonough from the Bank of Ireland had just joined. And I thought, there's a lot of good people now in the executive, so let bygones be bygones. We're going to save this bank and I want to be part of it. And I got a job with them. So it took 3 months to get through the interviews. And then I got the job. They wanted me to start in January. I had no accommodation sorted and we started in February. And it was going great. I had a great mentor. The team was great and really interesting work. So what we would have done there was focused on PEPs, so politically exposed persons. And they're deemed very high risk because of the risk of corruption, lobbying, etc., because they're political decision makers and they dictate public policy. So, for example, in relation to, yes, like let's say data centers in Ireland, and now suddenly they've got the green light. You can be absolutely sure that the big tech companies were lobbying the Irish government to do that. So that's why I'm not saying that was a corrupt decision, but it's a political decision with political, social consequences, etc. So that's why they're always treated high risk. That's not saying that they are, but the risk is associated with that particular role in office. They might also be senior figures in the army or senior figures in state-owned companies, etc. There's lots of different criteria, and obviously they're associates. And I loved the work because it was all the Middle East. So I don't think that's not a breach of my NDA. We had a lot of Middle Eastern PEPs, and that was my market. So you can use your imagination, all the Gulf countries, etc. And fascinating work. I mean, really, I really felt like I'm in here and I can actually make strategic decisions in line with the banks. You know, the bank needs to make money, but we actually were empowered and we were really good people and ethically minded. And we just wanted to make sure things were done properly and things were clean. And we conducted our due diligence and source of wealth verification and, right, these are the risks that are associated with this client, etc., risk versus reward. And that was all going great until the 15th of March 2023, when I was at work. It was a Wednesday. We used to go into the office 2 days a week, work from home 3 days a week in Zurich. And I heard someone behind me saying, I can sell all my shares in Credit Suisse for the price of kebab. And I thought, what is going on? Because our share price had been collapsing for months. And we had issues with our media perception and with the publication of our annual results, that somehow they were misrepresented by the chairperson of Credit Suisse. And this was 11 o'clock and our share price had fallen 21% since 9 o'clock. So we were in free fall. And I remember we went for lunch and nobody, because it wasn't part of our job, we conducted PEP assessments. It wasn't our job to look at the share price and it wouldn't be good for your head. And I told them what was going on, and everyone was like, "Oh God, this," because they were like, "Oh yeah, this is always the case. Like we normalize that our share price."
Yeah, ups and downs, the usual.
But this was in free fall, so I remember this. So 9 o'clock normal day, 11 o'clock share price has fallen, and at 3 o'clock we got an email from our team head saying, "I think no matter what happens, our jobs will be safe." And then by Friday, the three options were UBS to be forced, the other major Swiss bank, to be forced to take us over with liquidity from the Swiss Central Bank, or the Swiss National Bank, which is their central bank, allow Credit Suisse to collapse on Monday, which because we were a systemically, globally important bank, would have caused at least a European banking crisis akin to 2008, 2009. And at the time, they were saying Deutsche Bank was vulnerable, or a bailout, which the Swiss public didn't want because they had bailed out UBS actually in 2008. That was the thing. We weren't bailed out in 2009, but UBS was. And in the end, they agreed to UBS would buy us for only 4 billion, it was, I think, 4 billion Swiss francs. And our assets under management were some like 10 times, I don't know how many times bigger than that. With presence all over the world, Singapore, New York, we were bought for 4 billion. I do wonder about it. UBS, they had a loan from the Swiss National Bank for 13 billion, I think it was, for losses, etc. And I think they repaid it in 6 months. And 52,000 people, roughly 52,000 employees across the world, their jobs were jeopardized. I saw 2 of my colleagues being sacked in the one day. And yeah, it was very sad. I loved working there. And I didn't particularly want to work for the Cork team is coming through again. Colin Kelleher is the chairman of UBS. When it all happened the following Monday, after Patrick's weekend, he came out on town hall and said, "You're all to blame for this," in Credit Suisse. And I'm thinking, I'm here 7 weeks. Most of my team only joined in August. They're from around the world. They're people who actually grew up, understand what a PEP is because they came from dictatorships and horrendous regimes. But we're all to blame for 10-year scandals.
Bye Lorcan. I'm one of your favourite jobs.
It was sad. And I got really annoyed with this attitude coming from the top. In fairness, our colleagues at UBS, when we started migrating and integrating, they were lovely people. And I had a lovely boss and I could have stayed. With hindsight, do I regret leaving? If I'm completely honest, yes. Because I really didn't factor the impact of AI on the job market since 2024. Because I wasn't using it. We didn't use it at work. And I liked writing my own assessment and I liked assessments and I liked writing my own, doing my own research, etc. And I didn't realize what was going on in the job market. And it has been fairly grim, to be frank, since I left, realizing just between that and the fact that the banks are cutting jobs left, right and centre all over the world. The thing I dislike about risk and compliance, and I know loads of people who would agree with me who work in this field, it is regulatory driven. It is driven by regulators. Banks treat compliance, from their point of view, a necessary evil that they would rather not have to pay for at all if they could get away with it. That's always been my perception. We know that because the reason why we have compliance officers, etc., is because banks historically facilitated, let's say Credit Suisse, they facilitated a lot of dirty money back in the day. And banks treat it as a cost because it is a cost. We don't bring money in. We're gatekeepers to try and protect the reputation of the bank. But the problem with that is that banks are quite happy to accumulate risk and to allow maybe deficiencies or a small team of compliance officers to be completely overwhelmed. And then what happens? The financial regulators come in. Let's say FINMA in relation to Switzerland, or Austrac in relation to Australia, or whoever it might be. They come in and they issue fines. And the fines are meaningless in the greater context of the money that a bank is bringing in.
Is money the root of all evil?
Yeah, probably is, I suppose.
Tell me about the podcast. Did you do that for a long time? And why did you stop?
I did it from, I think the first one was April. I interviewed an Israeli, actually, who his work is to try and bring questions from the public to Israelis and Palestinians, pose the same question to both. He's trying to bring the two together ultimately, or to at least humanize the situation. So that was April 2020. And I think the last episode was maybe August 21. Why did I stop? Well, COVID ended, I think, is a big reason. And I hadn't as much free time, and nor did anybody else. People were extremely generous with their time. To be fair, people, absolute strangers. Of all the people I interviewed, I think I interviewed maybe 10 or 12. I've only met one of them in person, and I do chat to him pretty much every day. So we're good friends. But everyone else, and I'm in touch with some of them, but they just offered their time. for this random dude from Ireland to interview them about political issues. I would like to start it again, to be honest. It's been on my mind because I miss it and I enjoyed it and I felt I had a knack for it and I took to it like a duck to water, to be honest. And it was just the editing and all of that side of things, which used to take me ages. But I do miss it.
Yeah, I think it's very clear, Lorcan, you are hugely interested in this area. Follow your curiosity, open those doors again and keep nudging. If you enjoy it, that for me is win happy, doing something that you really love. So Australia, you're on the plane to Australia. What the hell? What is Australia going to bring you that fulfill your interests? How is that going to tick that box for you?
Not even sure. I moved over in September. It's now January, and then you're wondering, what am I doing here? So I went over with very, very high hopes that I was going to find a similar role to the one I had in Switzerland, or at least a kind of, the title of working in compliance, but that it would be in a completely opposite context of growth and revival, because Australia, to be summarised as quickly as I possibly can, Australia is way, way behind on anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing in compared to, let's say, the European Union, Canada, New Zealand. So the banks, etc., are all regulated, which you would expect, and they conduct client due diligence and EDD and source of wealth verification and all of that. But what we call gatekeeper professions they're not legally required to do so. Accountants, law firms, real estate agents, which has been the norm in Europe since, I think, for the last 18 years. And I think in New Zealand, maybe the last 10 years. Australia is only now bringing it into law on July 1st of this year, very belatedly, and only because Australia was on the verge of being what we call grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force. And I thought, this is going to be a goldmine. July is the deadline. This work takes ages to get into place, as I found out when we were transitioning to UBS. Just agreeing on definitions of a PEP, etc., took months. And I am astounded that it's now, to be very frank, it's now nearly coming towards the end of January, and they're only kind of taking off now at this stage. The big barrier I'm experiencing is sponsorship. So I'm on a working holiday visa, so lots of Irish who've been to Australia will know what I'm talking about. You go to Australia on a working holiday visa, which is valid for a year. If you want to stay on, you do your regional work or your farm work, as people think of it. It's actually broader than farm work if you want it to be. But I was told, you'll be swept up in, early on, and companies will sponsor you. So this is the alternative. You go to Australia, you work at something, and then eventually you find a job and a company sponsors you. That would be the case if I wanted to stay as a teacher, without question, or working in the mines, or working as an engineer or nurse. But if I'm completely transparent, they're not taking it seriously. I think a lot of these entities that are being brought into regulation, there's been lots of delay. It's very frustrating. I was working as a substitute teacher over there in schools, and they're on their summer holidays at the moment. All my friends were coming home for Christmas, and I said, I'll come home for Christmas and take a break from it. And as it happens, the place, my housemate, who was also my landlord, informed me at the end of November that I was going to be evicted anyway, because the co-owner is returning from abroad. So I thought, right, this is meant to be. I was meant to go home, and I'm not paying rent while I'm here. I'm back teaching here for a couple of weeks. I'm heading back in the third. I'm apprehensive because, once bitten, twice shy. But because the deadline is July 1st, I'm just hoping that at this stage, if I even just got a 6-month contract, I'd be very happy, which you can have on a working holiday visa. I think there's been a lot of layoffs, and there has been in Australia in some of the banks, and the market is somewhat saturated. But my hope is, with 90 or 100,000 companies now being brought into compliance for the first time, that maybe I'll be able to nab a role, or even a hybrid role, teaching AML, since I am a teacher or something. It still operates, I feel, in some way like a colony that's kind of in development. And there's a lot of exceptionalism, like with this, that we'll leave this until the dying seconds when the Financial Action Task Force makes us do it.
It sounds to me like the reason you're going over there, that it's just a bit too early in that curve for the opportunity that you need to open up for you. What's happiness to you, Lorcan?
Oh, that's a deep question. Notwithstanding this podcast, I've been obviously thinking a lot about things over Christmas because Australia has been tougher than I expected. I do think I need to maybe strip back the focus on the career a bit and focus on relationships and friendships and experiences and enjoying life. So again, framing, I could have stayed in Australia and got any job and just been able to say, I remember that, January in Australia and Byron Bay. Instead, I'm sitting here and it's pissing rain in Roscommon. I should have came home for Christmas. I'm not saying Christmas, but let's just say this month of January. Someone actually in Melbourne said this to me on LinkedIn yesterday. He said that you need to enjoy Oz. I mean, it's not just, if it's not working out for you at the moment, fine, but you're still working away. I mean, I am working 5 days a week over there and the schools are reopening and the pay is decent and I should be enjoying it more. And it'll happen when it happens. I do think happiness is, as you get older, you're more mindful of your family and your parents and valuing that. And I'm mindful as well, there's been people in my life in recent times, neighbours, etc., and they've health issues. I think you become much more aware of what's actually important is your health and your immediate family.
You do change as you go on, don't you? There's a guy who was a competing general manager, competing drinks company when I was in the drinks trade. I was managing a general manager of a drinks company and he was as well. And we became good buddies, even though we were real competitors. And he kind of spoke about that window when that's all you're doing. You're climbing, you're chasing this career thing. And then you realize that it can be quite empty and you wonder what were you chasing after in the first place. Mm-hmm. Then again, the flip side of it, you want to achieve things, the things you're interested in, and you've got a clear passion for a lot of what you're doing. And it sounds like your happiness will be rooted in a mix of those things, Tell me a time when you felt like you were winning. This is a buzz. I'm really enjoying this. I'm like, bang, this is just perfect. Was it that Credit Suisse window?
Maybe, but I do think that week in Lebanon, because it was so organic and I didn't plan it, and it was like the law of attraction just applied, where I went there and I'd only, as I say, 2 interviewees. And I know it might sound like a very small thing, and it was only research for a dissertation, but it was the freedom as well of me going off and doing it. And I had no guide and no one was showing me how to do it. And I had my list of questions and my thesis supervisor had approved of them, and that was it. Go off and do it. And I was in a school in Dublin and they were like, "You're mad, what are you doing?" And if I'm completely transparent, there's always been a journalistic trait in me. And I remember I emailed Orla Gearan actually from the BBC about it, and I just guessed her email address. This was before you can do it. You can check them now on ChatGPT and what have you. I just guessed it'll probably be this at bbc.com. And I got this lovely email where she said, if you really want to do it and you love it, you should do it. And there is an element of me wondering, should I have done that at the time? Because, as I say, I just met people and then they introduced me to people. And how about my professor? And then I went camping up in the mountains in Mount Lebanon and met a guy, and I needed someone who was male and Christian to meet the criteria of to make sure it was an impartial, what's the term we use when you're conducting polls? Representative sample of the population. And I interviewed him, and then I interviewed another guy who I hooked up with in a gay club over there. So it just was very organic, and they were the right people at the right time. And it was just a great week. And I do remember that week thinking, this is great. And it's not even hard. It's just very easy for me.
Perfect.
Truth as well, to an extent. Absolutely, yeah. And actually CWA as well, to be fair. But yeah, I'm longing for that again, if I'm completely honest. I mean, It's been a long time since I left Credit Suisse now, and I'm very mindful of that. And it's frustrating when I'm applying for jobs in Australia and they're saying your experience is amazing, but we don't provide sponsorship. And I'm facing this legal barrier. And then I'm wondering, maybe Australia, the world is my oyster. I think a lot of Irish who go to Australia, and I'll say this with the greatest respect, but they might leave a particular town and they've never lived anywhere else, or they might have done a stint in Limerick or in Dublin. But by and large, their experience is Ireland, and then they go to Australia. And my experience hasn't been that. It was Ireland and lots of other countries in Australia. And I'm very mindful of the fact that Australia doesn't know me anything, but I suppose I don't know it anything either. So if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I do, to answer your question, I'm longing for that again because I'm not experiencing it at the moment. And it's kind of frustrating, to put it mildly.
It sounds like there's a few barriers that you could do without by making that choice to try and make it work there. But anyway, you're following your instinct as well, so that's cool. I've one last question for you, and probably ties everything together. The career of a teacher and following your curiosity and everything. Who's been your best teacher?
Probably... why am I getting kind of emotional about this? I think Miss Fadden was very good.
Who?
Her name was Pauline Fadden. Why am I saying was? She's still alive. She was my English teacher in school and in secondary school, and I had her for geography as well in the Leaving Cert. And in fifth year, I suppose, to be frank, and maybe now thinking back, I wasn't, you were saying about like growing up and being gay. I was quite disengaged from school for a while in fifth year. And I think that's because I was becoming very aware of the fact that I was different and just not really sure how to resolve that. I wasn't feeling external pressure, was all internal. And I was starting to disengage from school and class, and I wasn't doing my homework. I remember one day I had her for geography and I also had her for English on the same day. And I had her for English earlier and I hadn't had my homework done. And that wasn't the first time, to be honest. And she just didn't even bother engaging. And then for geography, I actually said, I'll go up and tell her that I don't have it done. And she said, like, is there actually something bothering you? Is there something going on at home? And like, she stripped away. She would be strict, let's say, and no one to be strict, but fair. But this time I felt like, God, she's kind of talked to me like an adult here. And she's talking to me as if I'm like on a par. I really felt like we're on a par here. And I said, no, there was a lot going on, let's say, in my head, but there wasn't actually anything going on at home or anything, which she was kind of implying. And I said, no, I said, I'm just not doing my homework and I'm disengaged. I don't know, I'm lazy. I just have stopped doing it. She said, if you're going to tell me you're going to do it, I'm going to hold you to it. That was it. That was the line. I'm going to hold you to it. And then she said, like, I'm treating you as an adult. So if you're saying you're going to do it, I'm taking you at your word. And I just started doing my homework from that time on. But point on, only because she could have gone mad about it, or she could have shouted or screamed, but she didn't. She just called me up or I went up to the top of the class. The room was filling in, and she just spoke to me in a very kind of human way. And I don't know, in some way it did help because it just distracted me from my own thoughts. So even from that point of view, I don't know why I got kind of emotional about that, but I suppose it was a pivotal point in my life. And the funny thing was, I didn't like writing then. And that was one of the reasons why I wasn't doing my homework, because I genuinely found it difficult. And in the Leaving Cert, there's a lot of different styles of writing and your speeches, etc. And I loved them. And I hated fiction. And any time we had to write fiction, I hated it because I just didn't know how to do it, and it just wasn't capable of doing it. Maybe I am now. I don't know. I haven't tried. But I do remember writing speeches and things like that, and the feedback was always great. And even though I didn't like writing then, but now I love writing. I write on LinkedIn all the time. I'm posting about stuff that's going on in the news. I post about the Middle East. I post about Gaza. I post about human rights, etc., or anti-money laundering or whatever it might be. And obviously that developed in that classroom in Castlereagh, unbeknownst to me. As a teacher as well, we conducted, what did we call them? Comparative analysis on films and things like that. And we did, that's an Italian film set in Sicily. And she would talk a lot about Italy of the 1950s and compare it to 1950s Ireland and the Catholicism, etc., and conservatism. And I was picking up on this probably earlier than you would expect, because she was giving us these nuggets of adult insight into socioeconomic analysis. Cinema Paradiso, that's it. More so maybe than the writing, that really developed my sense of intellectual curiosity and, again, comparative politics, etc. That's where it started, for sure.
Well, before you set foot on that plane, I want you to make a promise to me and to all of my listeners. We're going to hear an episode of your podcast within the next fortnight.
It's called NAZRA, NAZRA.
Okay.
Politics, Society and Extremism. It's on Spotify. It's on anywhere you can get your podcast, as RT says. I was actually speaking to Drew a couple of weeks ago, the guy from Lebanese Irish from Belfast, and I had said, I might take it up again, and I might, if you want to be re-interviewed. God knows what we talk about now. At the time, we talked about Lebanon and Northern Ireland and what was going on at the time, but I mean, the world has changed a lot since 2020 or 21.
Before you hit the departure lounge, a few episodes and follow that curiosity, man. That sounds to me like what you're interested in, and maybe Australia doesn't have all those answers. I suspect it doesn't. Lorcan, good man yourself. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Much, Greg. I really appreciate it and I enjoyed it. Cheers.
Yeah, good man. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.